is Richard DeSaga, and this actually is the 21st annual Medfield History Day trolley trip sponsored by Memo. Each year we have a different theme, and the theme this year is the Medfield State Hospital cemeteries. And this is the first time we're actually going to do a little walking component. Back on Tuesday, when I looked at Saturday's weather forecast, and they were saying tropical storm, I was saying, what? But luckily the rain has stopped, and we're going to be able to do that. And actually the sun is coming out now. To get us between the two hospital cemeteries, well, I'm going to use another theme, and that's the theme of 1896, because 1896 is the year that the state hospital opened. So all the different things I am going to show you, and I'm going to give you a handout if you don't already have one, and refer to the photos. All will be what Medfield looked like in 1896. So that's kind of the theme. That's the year the state hospital opens, and the state hospital for 107 years is going to play a major role here in Medfield. Okay, to get you kind of set here, what was Medfield like in 1896? And we just give you a little bit of background, a little bit of information. First of all, Medfield's population back then was 1,872. Of that, 1,867 were white, 4 blacks, and 1 Chinese male that ran the Chinese laundry underneath where Larkin's Liquor Store is. Wow. Of that number, 1,506 were native born, 366 were foreign born, almost all of those Irish. Medfield was a very strong Republican community, as was Massachusetts. Medfield voted overwhelmingly in 1896 for William McKinley over Democrat William Jennings Bryan. The total town budget in 1896 was an extraordinary $1,600,497. Today our budget is a little over $52 million. Well, we spend about $1 million a week here in Medfield today. In 1896, Brook Street came in, connecting Green Street to Main Street, and the graduating class of Medfield High School in 1896 reached a total of 8 students. Wow. The high school was located on Pleasant Street opposite the Church of the Advent. Business was booming at the Straw Hat Works, which is right in front of you where the Montrose School is. And in 1896, the newspaper report said that there was a glut of apples in the Medfield orchards, resulting in farmers feeding them to their cattle and pigs. In 1896, the Medfield Board of Health reported 6 cases of diphtheria, 6 cases of measles, 3 cases of typhoid fever, 4 cases of scarlet fever. The scarlet fever epidemic closed all the public schools for a week. Bicycle business was doing its best ever here in Medfield, with several stores selling this 1890s craze of bicycling. More than 1 million bicycles were sold in the United States during that year. And if you look again in front of you where the parking lot is to the Montrose School, was the Elmwood Hotel, and they were holding weekly outdoor band concerts throughout the summer in 1896. So there's a little bit of a flavor. And if you refer to your handout and look at photo number 1, in 1896, one of the largest businesses outside the hat factory was the carriage making. And if you look at photo number 1 and you look where the pond is, look to your right, in the back of the pond and then all to the side were 5 different buildings that you see in that photo. And they made horse-drawn carriages. And the butcher wagon that they made there was sold throughout the United States. In those 5 buildings, they kept constant employment to some 15 different skilled workmen. The factory actually started back, in 1857 by Jacob Cushman. He later went into partnership with Joseph H. Baker. In 1890, Cushman retired, and Baker continued to run that. Any of you that have lived in Medfield before 1976 probably still refer to this as Baker's Pond. Those after 1976, when the town during the bicentennial went back to its original name, Meeting House Pond. If you look at photo number 2 in your handout, and if you look to your left, in 1896, that would have been the Curtis Mansion. And a little bit on Daniel D. Curtis. Daniel D. Curtis comes here to Medfield from the wilds of Maine in 1851 at the age of 21. And he's employed in the hat factory, which is located where the Montrose School is, under the ownership of Walter Janes. That Janes Avenue that goes around Town Hall is named. Now originally, when Walter Janes had it, and then Curtis, it was the old Unitarian parsonage that was located there, and they added on to it. So that was the hat factory, and again where the Montrose School is. Well, Janes dies in 1867, and then Curtis takes over running the hat factory, and it becomes known as the Excelsior Straw Works. And unfortunately, in 1876, it burns to the ground. And so what you see now in front of you, where the Montrose School is the 1876 hat factory that Curtis built. And it became the second largest straw and felt hat factory in the United States, employing more than 1,000 people that worked there, almost equal to the population of the town. And Curtis built this, actually enlarged the mansion that you see in photo number 2. The house originally dated from 1860, and Curtis had it remodeled in 1889, and you see the 1896. You see the 1896 photo in front of you. Unfortunately, it was torn down in 1987 with much town uproar that went on. The town tried to establish an historic district to save the mansion, but it was defeated at town meeting, and the house was demolished, and in its place, this attractive building was put up. Curtis had died in 1885, and we're going to meet a new person that comes in that probably is the most powerful politically and economically individual in Medfield, and that's Edwin V. Mitchell, becomes known as Colonel Mitchell. And actually, Colonel Mitchell arrives here penniless, kind of an Horatio Alger type story. With a little luck, he marries Curtis's daughter, Blanche. Curtis then appoints him plant manager, and then Curtis dies, and then Mitchell takes over ownership of the hat factory. And in 1896, the saying was that when Colonel Mitchell sneezed, the town of Medfield caught a cold. Mitchell literally controlled all aspects of the town of Medfield. And if you look out your window, again to your right, you see the First Parish Church. And if you look at photo number 3, there's a great photo showing the tall steeple that used to be on the church. And while today the Catholic Church has the largest membership in Medfield, back in 1896 it was the Unitarian Church that was the largest and most influential in town. And originally the steeple that was put on in 1839 was a smaller steeple. But then the Baptist Church remodeled, and they put a taller steeple under the Baptist Church, which didn't sit well with the Unitarians. They no longer had the tallest steeple. So using money from Colonel Mitchell, they put an extension onto the steeple to make it taller. Now they once again had the tallest steeple until, unfortunately, the hurricane of 1938, because it was top heavy, the steeple came down through the roof of the church, and for the next 50 years there was no steeple until 1988, when the current steeple you see now was put on. Next year, if you come on this trolley trip, you will probably see a new steeple. The church is in the process now of putting a cell tower inside the steeple to give some revenue for the church, and they are going to put a replica of that 1839 steeple back onto the church. So there'll be a different taller, not the grand one that you see in the photo, which was the one of 1896 that was top heavy that came down in the hurricane. Okay, again, if you look at photo number 4 and you look in front of you where the Montrose School was the hat factory, as I told you, the second largest in the United States, employing at one point more than 1,200 residents, many of them coming from Maine and the provinces of Canada in search of work. The hat factory was booming here. It was open till 10 at night. They were shipping more than 2 million hats annually out of the hat factory. And Colonel Mitchell became very wealthy as well. And if you look at photos number 5 and 6, and we go by the post office, that's where photo 5 and 6 was located. It was Mitchell's mansion. originally built in 1885. In 1898, it was remodeled, so 2 years after the coming of the hospital. And that was located right where you see the post office. And we're just going to pause here just for a second, just to give you some stats on this house. When it was remodeled, now remember, it's 1898, it cost Mitchell a sensational cost for those days of $90,000 of remodeling that he did on the mansion. It contained 32 rooms, it had a library, huge fireplaces, mahogany paneling, a music room, and a large dining room on the first floor. On the second floor were 11 bedrooms. On the third floor was a ballroom and a playroom. The ballroom held up to 800 people. And on the floor, to use for his kids, he had designed hopscotch, checkers, and backgammon into the floor. The grounds were all landscaped with a tennis court, carriage sheds, and barn. Now, after Prohibition ended, Mitchell had died, and it was sold, and they opened it up under the name of the Manor Inn. And the business flourished. Their lobster and steak dinners were known throughout the area. And again, with that hall holding 800 people, it became a mecca for wedding receptions that were held there. In 1961, the property was bought by the North Street Plaza Corporation, who wanted to demolish the mansion and put in a strip mall with a restaurant being its prime tenant. The house was so well built that they actually had to bring a tank into Medfield, remove the torrent to the tank, and then kept crashing the tank through the house until eventually the house was demolished. It was replaced by the strip mall, and in 1998 the strip mall was torn down and our current post office was built. Okay. If you turn the page in your handout and look at photo number 7, look at photo number 7, where Bullitt's Market is today. That was the Medfield Hotel. And the Medfield Hotel from 1874 to 1887 was in that house. In 1887, it was purchased by Mrs. Bullard, who used it as her private residency. And behind, she had a small meat market and later grocery store, so which is still the seeds of Bullitt's Market that's there today. That would date all the way back to 1887. The house itself was torn down in 1965, and then the complex was put in 1989. And if you look at photo number 8, and we're going to pause just for a second by the apartments up here. Photo number 8, this was the J.J. Adams Mansion. It is also originally the location of the Lowell Mason House. And as many of you may know, J.J. Adams bought the Lowell Mason House and he wanted to build the mansion you see in photo number 8. And so, because it was the birthplace of Lowell Mason, he appreciated the history and he had it moved. And it was moved over to 25 Adams Street. And as most of you know, just a year and a half, or 2 years now, it was moved again to Green Street, where it is now, and the Lowell Mason Foundation is working very hard to raise monies to restore the Lowell Mason House. They have a museum there, a small hall that music can be played and things like that. And then J.J. Adams in 1876 built the mansion you see in photo number 8. Adams actually died shortly after the house was completed, and it was purchased by a Boston businessman, brewer, and socialite by the name of Jacob Pfaff. And he moved here into that mansion, and this was all Adams land, and then it became Pfaff land. And in 1917, after Mrs. Hannah Adams Pfaff died, they donated the land where the Dale Street School and the Pfaff Center is now located. That's how the town got the land. There was one catch. The catch was, if a building of any sort was to be on that land, it had to be named after Hannah Adams Pfaff. So that's why that's called the Hannah Adams Pfaff Recreation Center. And not many people in town know this, but the official name of the Dale Street School is not the Dale Street School, it is the Hannah Adams Pfaff Elementary School. We're going to take the left here. Now, Adams Street had just been laid out, and it was called the Avenue. And it was the first real wide avenue laid out in Medfield. And if you look at photo number 9, once we go over the railroad tracks, I want you to look to your right. And then look at photo number 9, because running from the railroad tracks all the way down to Route 27 was the Curtis Mitchell Poultry Farm. At 504 feet in length, it was the largest single building in Massachusetts used as a poultry farm. Literally thousands of chickens inside there. And it began right here at the tracks and ran all the way down, on your right, down to Route 27. Owned first by Curtis, and then Mitchell took control of it, and then it was into several different hands. The barn you see on the far right of that photo was just up until recent times when they put those houses in. We're on Dale Street. Here's Frary Street on your left. But in 1896, Frary Street continued all this way. Later, when they redid the design and 27 came in, they stopped Frary Street, and it made more sense because it was straight to continue having this be Dale Street. But back originally, this was actually Frary Street. We're going to take the left up here. This is the new section of Medfield's cemetery. Medfield is unique in a number of ways that this is the only cemetery in Medfield, starting out on Main Street on the old section of it. Many towns have several different cemeteries, and many times graveyards and churches as well. So you can trace all of Medfield's history in this one cemetery. This new section was purchased by the town in 1889. Now, when the state hospital is built in 1896, Colonel Mitchell buys up 27 cemetery lots in the new section here, and then he sells them to the state for $1,000 for burial for patients at Medfield State Hospital. Right. So we're going to go down, and as we make the turn down here, what you think is a nice knoll, and I know families, if you've been here a long time, in the winter, a lot of people used to use a great sledding area. But if you look to your right, you will see the tomb. Again, in 1896, if you died in the winter, the ground would be frozen. You'd have to put you in the tomb until you were able to build. And all this knoll on your right lie 521 residents of Medfield State Hospital from 1896 until 1918. And there's a number of stories I want to tell you when we get out. So come on out, we'll take a look at this. Up until 1918, anyone that died in Medfield State Hospital had no family, no one to take them and bury them. We're buried here in these lots, and there's actually 520 residents that are buried here. And I'm going to show you, all they had was a small marker with a number on it. No name, just a number. And in the early 1960s, because all these, and I'm going to show you, we only have one example left that is kind of worn away by weather. But it was very hard when they were mowing. To get through all these little markers, they found it much easier. The town brought in dump trucks full of dirt and buried all the markers and then planted grass so that it would be easier to mow. And their identity now is totally gone. And there's not many people even knew that there's 520 residents buried there. The reason we stop in 1918 is because Medfield and the rest of the world gets hit with the influenza epidemic. And in that 1 month period of September to October 1918, 17 Medfield town residents died, 55 residents die up at the hospital. And the town says, whoa, state, get your own hospital. And that's why we go to the next one. That's why the state hospital, which is now up off of Route 27, that begins in 1918. So the burials here, with a couple of exceptions, the burials here are from 1896 when the hospital opens until 1918. I got involved. There was a hospital, state hospital cemetery redevelopment committee of a number of people that were concerned about the dignity and the burial of the patients. I got involved because I was down at the Historical Society, and the town brought down this very elderly lady in her 90s, and she said her father was buried, was a resident of the hospital, was buried. He had died in 1916, so I said, well, I know where it would be here in Vine Lake Cemetery. So I brought her up, and she said, well, where is the grave? And I said, well, it's somewhere under this hill, and she burst into tears. It just was a very sad, and the redevelopment committee really did a tremendous job, as you'll see up at the State Hospital Cemetery off of Route 27, which also just had numbers. And the idea was to get granite markers. We were able to get state money, and we did research, because you have to remember, anyone that died that lived in Medfield State Hospital was a resident of Medfield, and therefore we recorded with the town clerk. And so we would have the death certificates, and we were able to do the research. And up at the State Hospital Cemetery in 27, you will see a granite marker with the name, the birth date, and the death date. Now we come here, and we can't even find the markers. So there was a debate, do we try to dig and find where the markers are and then be digging all over, which we thought just was an impossible task. So instead, again with state money, what we're able to do is put these monuments that you see here. So you have the person's name, their birth date, and their death date. At least trying to restore some dignity to them. So there's 521 names that are here. Let me take you up and just show you what the markers look like, because there's one we can now see. You can see an example. So there's 520 of these markers throughout this whole knoll. They all look like this.
Was there some record of who 234 was?
Yes. The state has the state has good records, which is why when you get to the other next to each number, we're able to know. So those records were well kept.
So Richard, was this flat then, and then the town just kept bringing dirt? And
No,
dirt to make
you always
it
had the
knoll?
knoll, but these all still picture 520 of these markers sticking up about that high. They just brought in enough dirt to bury them, and then plant grass over them. But to try to find where they are, I'm sure if you find this must be a pattern of some sort, but to do that we just thought would be too much, and so instead they went with the monuments and down there. Okay, we're going to make the turn here and head down to the State Hospital Cemetery on Route 27. Up until 1895, Catholics were not allowed to be buried here in Vine Lake Cemetery. And in 1895, town meeting voted to set aside 40 cemetery lots for the burial of Catholics. And that is this section up here on your left. You will notice a lot of crosses on the grave stones, a lot of Irish and Italian names in there as well. And if you look up top where that fir tree is, you will see a dark monument, a darker stone monument. That is the grave of James Griffin. And James Griffin in 1896 becomes the first Catholic to be buried in Vine Lake Cemetery. Before that, Catholics were buried mainly in the Catholic cemeteries over in Canton, and a number of other places. James Griffin was a Civil War veteran here in Medfield, was very instrumental in getting the St. Edward's Church built here in Medfield. Watch your people on this side here, kind of watch some of the branches here. We're going to go on to Grove Street. This entire area was massive pine trees, beautiful pine groves that were in there, hence the name of the street, Grove Street. Grove Street ran continuously from here over to West Street, and then in 1974, when the new Route 27 came in, it cut Grove Street in half. 27 used to come up where CVS is and then take a right, go east onto Main Street, and then down North Street to Harding Street to Hospital Road, and then into Sherburne. And so in 1974, Grove Street now being cut in half, this remained Grove Street, and the other half, which is where the American Legion is located, became known as Peter Christoph Way, and the town named it after Peter Christoph, Medfield High School graduate at age 19, was killed in the Vietnam War. And so that other section of Grove Street is now Peter Christoph Way. And if you look on your right as we go down Route 27, you see all the flat, very flat land that's here on your right. In 1899, so a couple of years after 1896, this became the town's first dump. Before that, you would have your own property, you would dump on your own property. This became the town's first dump, and then landfill up until the transfer station was built. There's a couple of things in Medfield's history that I've yet been able to solve or figure out, and I'm stumped on. I'm going to take the right of the way. And one of them is right here. This area throughout Medfield's history was known as Dingle Dell. I don't have a clue why. Not a clue. I can't figure that out. But I want you to look at, on your left, which is called Schoolhouse Park, and the smaller of the buildings with the center chimney. That is actually the 1761 North School. And in 1801, it was moved from Harding to North Street down here, where in 1896 this would have been a residence. There would have been a home in the old North School. This entire area up here on your right, where Adam Street is located, was known as Curtis Grove. It was a massive pine grove, and it was also a popular day resort area that people would picnic and spend the day. And in 1894, they cut down all the pine trees, and they dammed up the brook, and they created a very large pond known as Mill Pond. And Mill Pond became the site of a lot of ice harvesting in the wintertime, and a number of ice houses were built. One roughly where what is now called Ice House Road, that goes into the Kingsbury Club in the center, and the other one on your right, more onto Harding Street. So all this area in 1896, the pine trees would have just been cut down, and this would have all been water, this entire area, all the way back to Harding Street, and this would have been Mill Pond, and just tremendous ice cutting in the wintertime would have taken place there. Now this entire area, if you look on your maps at photo number 13, and there's the railroad tracks that's running on our left, back where Adam Street comes in was known as Medfield Junction. And we had 3 train stations here in Medfield, and photo number 13 was back there where the Mansfield to Framingham line crossed the Bellingham to Boston line. And when the state hospital opened in 1896, the first 120 patients arrived at the junction, were put on open wagons. It said in the newspaper accounts the entire town turned out and lined the streets to watch the patients come to the hospital. This area became known as Harding. It was the economic center based on the hospital, which would eventually have a population larger than the town. If we slow down here just for a second, anywhere we could pull over. And if you look to your right, this yellow house, and if you look at photo number 14, that's the Robert Hinsdale house, which dates to 1750. And if you look directly behind you at that brick building, and if you turn your page over to photo number 15, that was built as the original Medfield, or the Harding Post Office, to service Medfield State Hospital. That stone building right behind you. Over time, there would be 2 additional Harding Post Offices, one to its right and one in that field in between those 2 houses. So we had, that was the original post office, and then eventually it was moving depending upon the rent that was charged. The federal government, if they could get a lower rent, would move the post office. And there was kind of competition between some of the different buildings that were located there. In this area, over time, there would be restaurants, gas stations, hotels, post office, all built in Harding to service Medfield State Hospital. And if you look at photos number 16 and 17, you can see an aerial view of Medfield State Hospital, and then you can see another photo of Medfield State Hospital. And if you look to your left, this was all state hospital land. They had one of the largest cattle herds. They had farming. Down here, the farmhouse is still standing. There would have been a large barn. There would have been silos. In the farmhouse, you had the farmer and his family lived with some 14 laborers and some 30 patients. And many of the patients worked on the farm. The vegetables and fruits and corn that was grown here serviced many of the state hospitals throughout Massachusetts. We're going to slow down here as we just go by. If you look to your right, you can look into the grounds of Medfield State Hospital. We can't take a vehicle in there, but you can walk in there now. You're welcome to walk all through there. With the Clark building gone, you can look in and see a little bit what the hospital would have looked like in 1896. And if you look to your left, the wooden building that you see, that's the farmer's house. And again, the farmer lived there with his family, 14 laborers and some 30 patients. All this land, in 1896 we had 425 acres of land. Eventually it would rise up to 609 acres controlled by the state, all the way down to the Charles River, all the way up through the North Meadows, all the way into Dover and Sherburne. It was all state land. A huge community, upwards of over 2,000 residents. Doctors, staff. This was a bustling community that was up here, very much tied into the community of Medfield. Most of the people, many of the people worked up the hospital. They went to dances, movies. There was interaction between the town and the hospital. The water supply, originally when the hospital was built, in 1896, they dug wells, a series of wells, to supply the water. But as the population increased, they needed a larger water supply. How many have ever been to Farm Pond in Sherburne? Pristine water over there. But what the state did is they ran a pipe from Farm Pond here to the hospital. And if you go to Farm Pond today, there is a pumping station still on the island that's out there. And they pumped the water from Farm Pond. That became the water supply for the hospital. But pretty soon the water at Farm Pond began to drop, and the state went back and began to dig new wells for a new water supply. We're going to pull over here. You can see the white sign that says Medfield State Hospital. Again, 1918, 1988. And we're going to walk in and look at the second of the cemeteries. And again, after the influenza epidemic, the residents would have been buried here. So come on. How many have been inside here before? So a couple have. Okay. This is the state hospital cemetery from 1918 until the last burial in 1987. That was there. Anyone see the movie Shutter Island? Yeah. If you did, you remember they actually showed this monument. They changed the name Medfield State, but the quote that's here, the redevelopment committee with the cemeteries wanted student involvement, and I was able to use my then political science students, and they had kind of a contest to come up with some type of a saying that could be used in all the cemeteries. And Andrea Fessler came up with the saying, "Remember us, for we too have lived, loved, and laughed," and that was selected. And you see that in Shutter Island. It shows you see the scene of the wrought iron fence, and that takes place here. Up until about 10 years ago, this very much was overgrown. Tree branches and stuff came down, and again, they were just numbers that were located there. And then starting using Eagle Scout candidates, they began to clean up, and the State Hospital Redevelopment Committee eventually was able to get state money to put the actual monuments that are up there. So come on in, we'll look. There's actually an organized pattern here.
Richard,
Richard, when did the hospital close exactly?
2003.
Okay.
If you look here, for example, you can see here's the original. This was all that was there, was just this small stone with a number. And the decision came to committee when we are able to get state money. You can see now there's the person's name. You have a birth date and a death date that's listed. The decision, some people thought we should remove the stones with just the numbers because of just kind of a horrible. Another thing, people said, no, leave it. Let people know what existed before. And so the decision was to leave both the number and then the new stone that has the name, the birth, and the death date. There's a group from Norwood that comes over every Memorial Day, and they lay a rose or a carnation on every single stone that's here. So that's what the flower that you'll see on a lot of the different graves that are here. It actually starts, we'll walk up, it starts in 1918 at the far corner on the hill, and then it runs by year, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So there's an organized pattern until you get over to this side, and then this, I believe, is 1938, it runs up the hill. So it's 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, and it ends down there in 1987, which would have been the last burial that took place. Sometimes in the records it was hard because they had many different names. As Marge said, sometimes they didn't speak English. It's amazing doing research on this, the number of foreign-born from Russia and Poland and Ireland and other countries that were here. Sometimes they had several different names, and so I'll show you, we added all those names. We'd put AKA and then we'd put whatever the additional name was. But it's just such a peaceful place. You have the Charles River in front of you. You can hear the 27 in the background, but other than that, it's just a peaceful location. But come on up, I'll show you the original first stones that came in. These two stones here would be an example of, they had several different names. And so you can see both names would be placed there as well. A couple of months ago we had a family doing genealogical research, uncovered that one of her grandmother was up here at the hospital. We were able to locate her grave, and she comes and places flowers there as well. Here's where it starts, and they continued the number system. So they left off 520 up in Medfield, and this starts 521.
Okay. Yeah. What happened in 1987?
The population of the hospital got so low that that's the last. These will only be buried here if you had no family, no one to take you back home. So the population by 1987 was very small. No one after 1987, there was anyone that didn't have a family member or died. That 1987 was the last that no one had a family to bring them home and bury them. The number system, I said, we had 520 down in Medfield. This starts 521, so they continue with the number system. 1918, and it runs straight up this way, and then comes back, and you can follow through the teens, the 20s, and the 30s, the different numbers. The one up there is an 18-year-old, Fred Paulson, age 18. At the hospital, there were a handful of young children. At one time, they were at the hospital as well. But it's amazing the number of foreign-born names that you'll see as we walk through. So we'll just take a walk over to the last ones, 1986, 87. You can just kind of look at some of the stones as you walk.
This is still state land?
Yes, the state, no matter what happens to the hospital, the state will retain control of this, and they mow it and care for it. Here's the last two. This is 1986, and that's the last grave there, 1987. So it would run up and down through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. These are the last two graves. The total of 4 acres of land that the state has. So between the two cemeteries, over 1,300 residents that are buried there. But I had a great conversation. Many of you may know Tom Sweeney here in town. And he was telling me that he worked with, when he was growing up, he worked with the then undertaker in Medfield, Joe Roberts. And those buried in Vine Lake and here, that's not the only burial place of those who were not taken home by their families. Because what happened a lot was that the medical schools, particularly Harvard Medical, would take the patients that died that had no family, and they would take them to the medical schools, dissect them, work on them for a number of medical reasons. And I was told that each, it was very difficult to talk about, but each body part was labeled with a number, so that when everything was done, all that was put back into a casket. And undertakers throughout the state actually bid and received a contract from the state to bury those patients that had been worked on in the medical schools. And because Danvers State Hospital had a huge cemetery, very large cemetery, all those individuals, including many from Medfield, are buried today up in Danvers State Hospital Cemetery, up there. And there's actually a group that is working to try to do the research up in Danvers to try to see who was buried up there from other state hospitals. We know there was a number, we don't know how large a number, that also were from Medfield that are now located up in the Danvers State Hospital Cemetery up there. So you have, it's not just the 841 and the 520, there are others that are up in Danvers as well. And if you look in your booklets on photo number 24 and 25, photos number 24 and 25, last Thursday, 2 nights ago, a hearing was held down at the center on Ice House Road. As many of you know, the future of Medfield State Hospital is going to become a huge issue. It's going to have a tremendous impact on our town now and for future generations. And so it's going to be very, very important, the decision that you and I make with the hospital. We have in the back of our minds the future of Medfield as well. And for the past year, there's been a group of Medfield residents and state officials working in mediation to try to deal with the environmental pollution issues, especially along the Charles River. And they presented their case on Thursday. If you go on to the town website, if you were not at that meeting, you can read about that. And they also have an area that you can put in your thoughts, your suggestions, your ideas of what you feel about this environmental plan. And you're urged to contact, and they will have the names of the people on the redevelopment committee as well as the selectmen to give feedback of what your ideas are and what your thoughts are on this plan. The other thing, for the first time, the state has come back and said they are willing to sell the property to the town. So that's a decision. Will it be financially good for the town? Not. What should go up in the hospital? Should it be housing? Should it be light industry? Should it be recreation? Should it be open space? All these decisions are going to have to be made, and now is your time to give input on that. But if you look at, again, photo number 24 and 25, and you look where CVS is, there stood the Howard Mansion. And
Very small.
in 1959, the mansion was torn down, and this attractive building, which was Medfield's first supermarket called Super Duper, was built. And it's the same CVS building. And if you look at the last photo, which is number 26, and if you look where the Needham Bank is located, that's where the Johnson, I'm going to take the lecture.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's where the Johnson house was located, and that's what it would have looked like in 1896. That was torn down in 1967 for the bank. And we're now on to Upham Road. In 1896, this was called Short Street. Its name changed in 1911 to Upham Road. Thomas Upham, which is now the Upham House, lived in that mansion that is now the nursing home that's located there. You guys have been a great audience. I thank you. I volunteer my time to do this, but if you want to tip the bus driver, I don't think she'll fight you on that.
I do.
Thank you.
Production support provided by Medfield.tv. Access to our community.
Hi, I'm Kurt Schilling, and you're watching Medfield.tv.